Scott Hebert, welcome back to Suit Up the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, as people are listening to this, they have celebrated Christmas. We have had Christmas. What was the best part of Christmas this year for you?
Probably
Projecting forward in the future.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Canada right now, but projecting forward in the future, it's probably nice being in Thailand for a month. I'm probably got a tan on because I'm going to Thailand. So, that's probably
got some dope clothes.
Yeah, getting away. Yeah, get some clothes. I'll probably be in pretty good shape because I'll be doing Muay Thai twice a day for a month at that point. So, yeah, life is good. Fingers crossed, no injuries.
That's exciting. Christmas was wonderful. I looked magnificent. I might be wearing the smoking jacket that I'm wearing now, actually on Christmas Day. We'll see. We'll see if that gets in the suitcase. But happy holidays. Merry Christmas to everyone listening. We are doing what's probably my favorite podcast, honestly, of us doing every year. Because we've done this now 5, 6 years?
No, I think 3 or 4. I
was it only been 3 or 4?
I think so.
We'll have to double check at some point. But
that brings us back to 2018. I think that's probably around when we met. You know what I mean?
That's right. Well, the thing is, I remember starting the podcast, I think I thought I started in 2015.
But it might have taken a while before we connected because I started my farm in 2015.
Right? Okay, that's right. Maybe it was 2017. Regardless, ladies and gentlemen, the annual books episode. Scott, why don't you start us off with your, in no particular order, these are the top books that we have from this year. We pick 5 regular books and 1 specific audiobook recommendation. Scott, what is the first book that you want to talk about today?
I think, first of all, I want to say that we both read considerably less books this year.
Shockingly.
Yeah, but we were still both over, I was at least at 17, I think, and you were more than that. But which is weird because, like I said, that's over a book a month already as we're recording this.
Also, I want to point out most of yours are probably nonfiction. I only read 15 nonfiction books this year.
Yeah,
which is
totally. It's super interesting to me that because when I first started reading, and I guess that a lot of the books that we had read were all basically nonfiction books, and that's more or less what we connected on, having read so many of the same books. And as I'm getting older and just life is changing, I've been reading way more fiction. Specifically this year, as you'll see, some science fiction and fantasy, which
which is cool because I don't think of you and science fiction and fantasy usually in the same breath.
Yeah, I think I surprisingly like the science fiction ones a lot more. Yeah, I didn't think I would like them that much, but the one I'll talk about in a little bit is I think the greatest feat of imagination that I've ever read from an author. But we'll start off with my first book because This was a book that I read at the beginning of the year, and it was called $1 Billion Painter by G. Eric Kuski.
Okay.
There's this guy named Thomas Kincaid, and he was painting these, how should I describe it? Like little cottages and stuff with all these lights, and he basically licensed his stuff out to Hallmark. He was selling paintings, and then some other guys got involved, and they did licensing deals, and they had Thomas Kincaid galleries, and it was really big. Like I've told you, it was his target market would have been middle-aged Christian women.
Yeah,
probably mostly. Like I said, your mom's friends. If you've seen some of these paintings, they're probably in your mom's friends' houses.
Oh, 90% certain.
Yeah, and Hallmark calendars and stuff like that. It's Tom Kincaid painting, and it's basically the story of this guy's life and how they licensed all this stuff out, all this art stuff, and it ended up becoming $1 billion business. And Thomas Kincaid, they called him the painter of light because he said he was painting God's light into every image type of thing. That was so he's just painting these idyllic cottages where there was light shining from everywhere. It was super bright. But
it kind of defines the image of Christmas to a certain degree.
Yes. There's a specific Christmas line that they have of his, and they were doing ornaments and stuff. But the story of the book is a very tragic tale.
Oh.
Um, he ends up just being a bit of a drunk, and the image that he projects with his paintings and with his basically the person that you think would be painting those paintings is not the person who actually existed in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting from the perspective of that I'm a painter and seeing how different artists work and operate. But it was interesting just seeing how this guy's life was and how um, I guess that you got to be careful. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? You got to be careful because it's like a tragic tale of what's like a warning tale. What was that?
Cautionary tale.
Yeah, a cautionary tale. That's it. A cautionary tale. It's just how stuff can go wrong. How you can. And I don't necessarily think that he sold out because he was painting the paintings that he wanted to make.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people would think that if you're making $1 billion business, you're just a sellout, right? No matter what. But I don't think that he was necessarily sellout in that. But I think it was more for me of a cautionary tale of what can happen if you just go down the wrong path with your crutches. And yeah, it was just sad. I was just kind of like intrigued by it the whole time from a business perspective, and then from a personal standpoint as well. And yeah, that was the first one that I read it, and I was like, okay, that's probably going to be on my list for this year.
That's always that interesting conversation of like the tortured artist. Not all artists have to be tortured, obviously, but it's always shocking when you see how many people that do create such great things do have this crutch that they tend to lean on. And yeah, it is a cautionary tale. It's a good thing for all creators to remember.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that being an artist, you're high in openness, the psychological trait openness, which is like openness to experience. So like me being open, and I guess this guy too, Thomas Kincaid, being open to like making paintings, like to be able to sit there and do that and to have that openness to experience that you're gonna like sit here and create something. It also works the same way with like crutches though too, right? With vices, I should say, in the sense that like if you you're open to going too far with drinking or drugs or sex or whatever your vice is, right? Eating too much.
It's drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing though. That openness is it's the spectrum, right? You can be good or bad, so you got to dial it back on the bad while trying to be good, but it's tough because you're open to both, basically.
Yeah. So for my book, I can actually take this in a couple of different segues to a few of the books on my list, but the one I'm going to go with is I went down a list of reading about authors this year. So several of the books I read were about authors. And the one that surprised me because I didn't seek it out, I was just generically looking up author biographies. And it was a part of Audible's new Audible Plus catalog. Wolf, The Lives of Jack London by James L. Haley. Most of us remember Jack London because of things like White Fang and Call of the Wild, which what shocks me is I didn't realize Call of the Wild was before White Fang. I always assumed that was White Fang, then Call of the Wild. But anyway, he was a fascinating man. He's like, Jack London was, we think of like that Theodore Roosevelt most interesting man in the world type, that Hemingway hero. Jack London was that. He like ran away from home as a kid. He was a tramp for a couple of years. He decided to he was a pirate and then turned around to work for the Coast Guard to get rid of the pirates before he was 20.
That's crazy.
He went and looked for gold in Alaska. He became a writer. He traveled. He was a reporter. And all along the way, he was a writer. He knew from very early on he wanted to write, and he had a discipline and a habit of writing 1,000 words a day. That was his goal, is every day sit down and punch out 1,000 usable words. And I found that very inspiring, and it was fascinating to hear his story because, again, we think of Jack London, we think of Call of the Wild, we think of White Fang. He was like a staunch communist and was very much like into social movements and writing about the class system. And basically anytime he opened his mouth about what he thought and felt, people would start hating him. Then he'd write stuff that were just like boys' adventure stories. And everybody would be like, oh, Jack London's amazing. Then he'd go on a tour and talk about the proletariat, and people would want to burn him with pitchforks.
That's really funny.
It was interesting because it seems like his story, he did not know how to manage his image.
Yes.
Because he had a great story, but in public, he never figured out how to properly present his story. Because even at that, by comparison to today's like standards on things, he'd probably just be considered like left leaning.
Yes.
And not like hard communist, what we think of like with Russia, because this was in the 1910s before we had Stalin and all of that stuff. So very different perspective on it. It was more of an intellectual communism, but still fascinating life, fascinating character, and his discipline in doing the thing that he's supposed to be doing and actually producing words as a writer was very inspiring to me. I took that as my number one thing.
That's cool. That's really, that's an admirable quality to have. We talk about that a lot, but like, gotta stay on the grind.
So what's your next book, Scott?
I guess my next, this is where I cheat because my next book is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it's 3 books.
I mean, it's meant to be consumed. It's like one long saga, right? The Lord of the Rings.
Story. Yeah. I watch YouTube. I don't watch TV. I have YouTube. I have it on desktop. That's what I do. I watch it. And I started getting all these. There's a new Amazon show called The Rings of Power that was coming out. And there was all this. They basically released a trailer. And then there was all these like social commentator videos where they were reacting to the trailers. And they were upset because there was like a black elf and there was like a black dwarf and stuff. And they weren't upset from a racist perspective, but they were basically saying, though, that this is an indication that this is not going to be like a lore accurate thing. And people were very passionate about that this was a thing. And
Vulcanites are a thing.
Yeah, I knew that, but they were really into like this. So I was intrigued by that, and I wanted to see if these people were just being racist or if they were had some legitimate concerns, because it sounded like legitimate concerns. It sounded good in my head, but it doesn't mean what the truth is. So I listened to the Lord of the Rings books on Audible while I was painting, and I was just kind of pleasantly floored by it. I had read The Hobbit in school, but it was just really such a rich tapestry of like I think I said this to you before, but like you, like when you wrote your book, Reason for Reason and Romance, you had a story and created a universe around that. Whereas when I'm reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it seems like he created a universe and this story is just a story that's taking place in this world. And when I got through it, I was a little kind of just pleasantly surprised, not blown away, but just pleasantly surprised by it. It really made me, it opened my eyes, I guess. I was just, pleasantly surprised by it.
Well, it's interesting you make that comment about universe and story, because so one of the criticism I hear people talk about the Star Wars saga story in general is that it is a fascinating world that only gets narrowed into the lives of characters and families that you recognize. Very little of it gets to be, well, this is a grand, amazing universe. What's happening elsewhere in it? Now, admittedly, there are like comics and books that sometimes do that. But in a general rule of thumb, most of like the mainstream media stuff about Star Wars is Skywalker related or something that has to do with those original trilogy films. Yeah,
well, like the story and stuff is not just those characters.
Correct.
It's basically, like you can use the Amazon show use the names of the characters, but it's not the characters themselves.
Well, and sorry, go ahead.
No, that's pretty much what I was going to say.
the not Star Wars, with Lord of the Rings, the fascinating thing is Tolkien really is a deep thinker on this.
Oh yeah.
I absolutely adored reading his. There's a book called The Fellowship: The Literary Lives of the Inklings, by husband and wife author pair, and basically it's a story of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and then George MacDonald, and then there's a fourth guy whose name I can't remember. But basically, all of them were writers, and as a group together, they would talk about books. That was where the Lord of the Rings first like heard its audience, and as they were developing it, Tolkien was a master of myth. He created just a dense, fascinating, populated world that has consistent rules.
Yeah.
Throughout it, and that's part of the reason why I can understand why people would be upset at the reaction, because this isn't like generic fantasy world where this is our world just with fantasy elements.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord of the Rings world is its own thing. Like it is so much its own thing.
He was like Tolkien was a linguist, and then he created languages, and then based on the languages that dictated different elements of the lore on how these languages shaped out in the universe. And so you can see that in the Lord of the Rings for sure. I just found it super interesting from that perspective.
Now, I tried to read Fellowship of the Ring. I got all 3 audiobooks on Amazon. They had a great sale. Andy Serkis is an amazing narrator. I just couldn't make it through because it is dense. And I think that if I was doing something else while I was listening to it, I probably could have kept going through it. But you kept texting me like, have you given up yet? Have you given up yet? Eventually I did quit just because I was like, I need to go on something else. I respect the author and what he did. The moment Bilbo starts singing a song, I'm just like, this isn't my bag.
He likes singing. No, you know what's funny? I read a bunch of books this year that I was like telling you about, and I was like, whatever, I'll tell you about it, but I know you're not gonna. This is not a Terrace book, you know?
Yeah. I did enjoy trying to read it though, because again, as I'm listening to it, it was like, this is the fountainhead. Yeah. This is where all other fantasy stuff comes from. And you can tell that reading or listening to the book, you can tell everyone has been aping this. Yeah. So like there's one fantasy series I adore. It was in my list a couple years ago, Spellmonger books. The guy that writes those, he has quoted Tolkien a couple of times, and you could tell one of the things he takes away for his fantasy world that Tolkien does is it has a consistent language.
Yes.
And that is, he has made the comment in an interview that that's something he learned from Tolkien, because if you have a consistent language, it means the culture then has a consistency.
Yeah.
And that makes your world more real.
Totally. Yeah, it was super interesting. What's your next book?
Next book is, I'm going to go with, this is actually the first book I finished last year. Soho Sins by Richard Vine. It is from the Hard Case Crime publishers. It is a fascinating, gripping noir novel that's based around like the art world in New York. Basically, this guy's wife has died, and everyone's trying to figure out if he did it. His friends like owns a gallery, and he's kind of tagging along with the private detective who's hired by the corporation that this guy owns to clear his name. Of course, then that guy dies too. There's a kid involved. There's an ex-wife. It is a twisting, questionable, morally ambiguous world that is so noir in the best of ways. It has 2 epilogues. It goes from, okay, we figured out who the killer is. Happy ending. Epilogue 1. There's more to it. And it's bad. Epilogue 2, what you thought was bad is even worse.
Is it a long book?
It's thicker than most of the Hard Case Crime books. It's like about yay big. I'd say it's about an inch width. Yep. It's really good though. Like genuinely, I read it and I was like, this is on my list literally since the beginning of the year. That's basically fun. I don't want to spoil anything because again, it's a mystery. So the things that the revelations are part of what makes it enjoyable. I just really want to encourage people to read it because it is a thrilling mystery, even though it involves the art world of all things.
Yeah, who likes art?
Exactly. It has compelling characters, and it sums up that theme of noir perfectly, in that no one is righteous, no, not one. Even the people that you thought were good and you were rooting for in the book, you realize are the worst people on earth.
That's really interesting.
So that is one of my favorite books from this last year. It might be my favorite hard case crime book. So definitely, it's not an Audible opportunity, unfortunately, but I highly recommend it to everyone. I know, Scott.
I was so close to listening to it.
So close to listening to it. So what is your next book?
I have this rule that if I hear something from like 2 or 3 people, I'll just read it. No questions asked. Doesn't matter what it is. I don't care if it's a girly book. I don't care if it's something I don't think I'll give it a shot. You know what I'm saying? But when someone gives me a straight recommendation, I'll also use that same rule. And someone that I was talking to told me about this book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. And it's basically a book about self-talk. It's an old book. I think I sent you it and you're like, oh, that looks like a very 90s cover. And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, it did. After you said that, I was like, yeah, you're right. But yeah, it's called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Shad Helmstetter. And I thought that I was going to listen to a book and it was going to be foo-foo, woo-woo nonsense. And I was kind of excited because sometimes I like listening to that stuff and being like, wow, this is not how I think at all. Like I was watching this one art girl the other day, unrelated tangent, but she was doing her vlog or whatever, and she's like, oh, I'm a Gemini. And like she was like talking about all her like Gemini energy and stuff was like going in this. And like I was just like, no, but like this is awesome. Right. So I was thinking that it was gonna be like kind of like this, like weird. And then it was just about like not so much like it was about like brain plasticity and about how and this is all stuff that I had read a lot of stuff about the brain before, and so this is all stuff that I knew because like I said, this is an older book from like the 90s. So it wasn't anything revolutionary in my mind about that, but there was he basically had these books or like these tapes that you can do, and it will be like a little program and you're supposed to listen to it in the background, like while you're like doing the dishes or whatever. And it's like these self-talk tapes. It's how to talk to yourself. And so there's like ones on success. There's ones on like goal setting. There's ones on health and fitness. And he basically updated it now. So there's an app that you can get. And cool. I got like a free trial of it or whatever. So I was like trying these things out because I just want to see what it was. And yeah, man, there was like I had some like mind-blowing like brain revelations from it. Especially within regards to like health and fitness, and I don't really have that much to say about this other than this, but I always, because I used to be really fat, and I think that like health is something to be obtained. Like if I'm on my regular diet, that means that I'm not eating very healthy, and then when I'm eating good, then I'm making a healthy effort at it. And I forget exactly how it was worded, but in one of the tapes on health and fitness, he basically says that like eating healthy is normal. And I was like, oh, that's not how I think about that at all. I don't think about health being normal. I think normal is bad. I need to shift my mind to thinking that healthy is normal, right? And when I'm bad, it's the other way. Instead of like health is something to be obtained, health is something that you have, and that should be the normal state. And I was, I don't really get like before when I was reading books, I would get like because you just don't know anything, right? So you're getting quite a lot of like revelations from reading, especially a lot of nonfiction books, where you're like, oh, that is how that works. Oh, okay, right? But I was just pleasantly surprised by this book. I thought it was different than I thought. And then I got the tapes and then I took some really good things out of it. And I was like, oh, this is not so much weird foo-foo. It's actually quite practical. And I liked it.
It goes back to the old principle of as a man thinks, so he is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we commonly forget about today. I mean, genuinely speaking, like that is most people do think of it that way. Health is something to be obtained, not something they already have, and make choices to lose.
Yeah, and that was
lose
just
through circumstance.
totally, and that was just like one of the big things that I took away from it when I listened to it. But yeah, that's more what I'm thinking.
That segues nicely with my next book, actually.
Okay.
Discipline is Destiny: The Power of Self-Control by Ryan Holiday.
By who? No, I'm just
Ryan
kidding.
Holiday. Which,
nice.
for people that don't remember, that's how Scott and I met, was because he had been interviewed for the Daily Stoic.
Yeah.
Which, super cool still. And so this is the second of the 4-part series Ryan Holiday's writing about the Stoic virtues. Courage is Calling came out last year. It was fine. It was good. It was like, whatever. Discipline is Destiny. Maybe it's just confirmation bias. The fact that I am someone that believes so wholeheartedly in discipline. But that book was amazing. He takes you through the idea of using the stories of people from real life as illustrations to go through the different ideas of how discipline works, discipline of the body, discipline of the mind, and then thinking basically it's transcendence, which is the combination of the two of them in 3 parts. It is really good, which that sounds like such a vague recommendation, but it is. He uses Lou Gehrig as the example for discipline of the body. Lou Gehrig, for those who don't know, was, if you've seen that, there's a Gary Cooper film called Pride of the Yankees. That's the story of Lou Gehrig. He was like this immigrant who became a Yankee back when the Yankee was literally the murderer's row, is what they called it, when it was him, Babe Ruth, just all the greats of baseball. I'm not even a baseball fan, but I love the story of Lou Gehrig. He was a workhorse who disciplined himself to do the right thing. He always showed up. He always put his best in. And he did a good job not letting being a Yankee at the time where baseball was at zenith go to his head. Whereas Babe Ruth, he contrasts that Babe Ruth was a man of excess and appetite who spent everything he made and got massive. Gehrig, literally up until the end, was doing everything he could. And he knew he was going to stop when he could no longer play.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
He also uses the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, who recently passed away, Queen Elizabeth II, as an example of discipline of the mind. She, being royal, there is a responsibility that she has had to be queen. It is a vague responsibility that is ill-defined even by the British people.
Mm-hmm.
And British people, if I'm wrong on that, feel free to contradict me. Scott's Canadian, so you're like half. And it's so well done. The book is an excellent exposition of the idea of why discipline matters, not just in the ways you think of discipline, because he even goes into it's discipline to know what the right thing is, discipline to do it, and discipline to not let it go too far.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to get into those books. I want to finish up my own little Stoic project before I kind of get, because you can't take without getting influence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm excited to dive into those once I finish my own personal project.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the other things, just as a quick side tangent, one of the other reasons I really like the idea of this book is that I heard recently someone say on a podcast that when there was some kind of study that came out about the role of like dads in a kid's life.
Yeah.
One of the number one things that a boy can learn from his dad is what it means to be disciplined. Like that is the masculine trait. It's having strength, but knowing how to regulate it.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. That's good. I like that a lot.
What's your next book, Scott?
It's called A Billion Years by Mike Rinder.
Okay.
It's a book about Scientology.
Continue.
Yeah, I'm a Scientologist now. No.
Are you going to try promoting a Tom Cruise movie to me?
Yes. No. I watch scam videos on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things. Somehow, I don't know. It's like seem like frauds and whatever.
Yeah.
So there was this entrepreneur guy named Grant Cardone, and there was like this scam video about him, and I started watching. I didn't know, but he's a Scientologist, I guess. And I started watching this channel called Growing Up in Scientology, and it's this guy that got out of Scientology, and I was getting more familiar with what was going on, basically in Scientology. This guy, Mike Rinder, was one of the. He's basically the highest rank. He was in charge of like Scientology International at one point in time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was like on this boat called the Free Winds with Ron L. Hubbard when they were doing it in like the 1960s, 70s or whatever. And so he like worked for Ron L. Hubbard, like he worked with him. So this guy, Mike Rinder, ended up writing a book about basically his story. Because his parents were into it, and so they just grew up in it. They just didn't know anything different. And when I say this, I don't mean that it's a badly written book, but there's like the Lord of the Rings and this other book that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. They're like really well written in the sense that like I want to keep reading it because the story is super engaging. This one I was engaged with it just because it's like so fucked up. Like, yeah, it's just crazy. It's just craziness. And they're like trying to get like tax exempt status, and there's like power plays, and people are getting sucked in. And they're like, if you're going to do the full bridge, which is like going from whatever the entry level Scientology course is to like OT8, which is Operating Thetan 8, it's like you're spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get into it. And they're like destroying people's lives. They're like, it's wild, man. It's wild. I can't get into super specifics on it because otherwise I'll just be talking. I'll have to get too much context basically for the rest of it. You know what I mean? But it's just wild. It's insane. I think that's the best way to put it. Like, it's just like you're just watching this train wreck, and it's sad. It's like I'm interested in how people can think something is the truth. Basically, how you can get indoctrinated into something like that. I'm super fascinated by that, because I think it happens to an extent with all religions that people are indoctrinated into their belief system. But I think that there's some that are
a step above the rest.
A lot less destructive. They're all destructive to some extent in different capacities, but it's just super interesting, man. What they think is normal, what they believe in, and how you can just kind of keep getting nudged along into like, because basically like they don't know when you're in the beginning stages, you're kind of just thinking that you're getting like these courses on like how to operate better. And then as you get deeper and deeper into it, then it becomes there's more alien stuff basically that comes out, and it just gets wackier and wackier. But like if you've already been indoctrinated in the beginning, then at each step you're just taking the next step. You're not taking a big leap.
It's slowly incrementally moving you.
Yeah.
Towards.
Like if I talk about like there's like this Lord Xenu guy that's like this alien that like it doesn't really matter the story, but basically if I told you that, you're going to be thinking like, oh, that's crazy. But the way it happens in Scientology is that like you start doing these courses where you're like improving yourself, and there's these people called suppressive persons in your life, and it's like we all know a suppressive person that's like tearing you down, right? So it's like really easy for people to latch onto that, and then you just get nudged along, and then by the time that you're to the part where you're finding out about Xenu and stuff, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. Like you are
sunk costs.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a very good way to put that. Yes, you're so deep in the sunk cost fallacy though that it's tough, man. So I found it super, 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 super interesting from a train wreck perspective more than anything. And it was kind of like I don't know. I didn't think I was going to read a book about Scientology. You know what I mean? And then it's wild. That's the best way I can put it.
Speaking of things becoming crazy, my next book is Under the Knife by Matt Pagorgis and John Borges. We had them on the show. Absolute great guys, but they wrote this book. It is a pulp book. the book goes from kind of like that whole concept of nudging people along. That's why this is perfect segue. The book starts out with basically this. It's 1940s Hollywood. This girl is an actress that is struggling to get work because, she's pretty, but there's a line in the book that to play a nun in Hollywood, you need to have Jane Russell curves.
Yes.
She just doesn't. So what starts as, she has this chance meeting with this nice guy who's a plastic surgeon that basically offers to give her plastic surgery. She goes from that to Nazi hunter.
Yeah.
Now that is not immediate. It goes to the plastic surgeon. She wakes up from the surgery to discover he has turned her into his dead wife.
Nice.
Then there's so much more goes into it. Scott, this book becomes bonkers. I was reading it, every page. I'm like, wow, things are just like ratcheting up in each chapter. Like slowly, we've gone from just, okay, she wants to get plastic surgery to implants to Nazi hunter is a very quick, very large leap. Yet it sticks the landing. This book ends in a very satisfying way where you are excited to see what happens next. I can't begin to praise this book enough because it was so much fun. This is not a book for everyone, though. If you do not like the concept of Hitler, boys from Brazil, he is in Argentina plotting for the Fourth Reich, don't read this book.
That's fine.
But if you're good with Nazi hunters and weird, amazing concepts of action adventure, everything in a B movie that you want, this is the book for you.
That's great. Yeah, I believe you guys were talking about it on the podcast you did together.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds fun for sure.
It is. Again, I will link in the show notes this episode, the interview with Matt and John. Amazing, amazing book. Okay.
I will tag that onto that then. I had Emma by Jane Austen on my list. But I also slashed it with another book called Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
Yes.
Okay. I know, that's why I said I'm cheating because
that's okay. This is just us talking books.
My 6 book list is like 12 books. So I read, the reason I put Emma on there by Jane Austen is because it was one of your favorite books. You told me to read it. I read it. I didn't like it. Then I watched the movie.
I was going to say, you watched the movie because of Autumn to Wild.
Yeah. I was painting this forest thing. Long story. Anyways, I watched the movie. I really liked the movie. But what my big takeaway out of it, which I don't think happens to me very often, but I was not imagining Emma correctly.
Yeah.
I think the reason I did not like Emma is because of a failing on my part to comprehend the set and setting of the novel and where it took place.
Yeah, the historical context.
Yes. So the things that really bothered me about it were bothering me because I was comprehending it wrong, basically, is what I'm saying. So there's this other book called Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. He's the guy that wrote The Martian.
Yes.
The reason I like this book a lot, I thought it was like super fun. It starts off and this guy's in, I think it's called like a white room opening where you don't know what's happening. He's trying to find his footing. And it starts off and it's super technical. And his book, The Martian, is the same way. It's the Martian is astronaut Mark Watney is on Mars, and he's trying to piece together how to stay alive. Basically, it's left on Mars. In Project Hail Mary, he's trying to piece together where he is. He ends up being on a spaceship, and he finds out that he's floating around some star that's not the sun. Okay? So it gets into it, and there's like flashbacks to Earth. There's fantastical elements to it. But I guess a little bit of spoilers, but halfway into it, there's an alien that comes into the book. And it goes from being like this it tricked me basically.
Yeah.
Right? Because you got to that part, right?
Yes, I got that far, and that's where I stopped. I haven't given up on it like I've given up on Lord of the Rings. I
Yeah.
will finish it eventually.
Yeah.
Just haven't gotten to it yet.
Totally. It's yeah, it goes from like super technical to fantastical. And I thought it was a very interesting contrast between this technical element and the fantastical element. Like the fantastical element is grounded in a reality because he's talking about like these microbes called talmebas and
Yeah.
without getting too much into the
He gets
details.
into science jargon to explain how the
Oh, yeah.
fantastical works. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
as a casual reader are like, I buy this. Like still a
Oh,
sci-fi
yeah.
novel. So yeah,
Totally.
I can get it. There's one fantastical element here.
So then back on Earth in this novel, I would say that because the guy's in space alone with just this alien. So when they're interacting, it's like you can do whatever you want, basically, because it's like there's however the alien wants to interact. You know what I mean? It's not going to be weird. But then back on Earth, a lot of the characters are, I would say, fantastical.
Okay.
In the sense of they're not.
They're not people we actually meet in real life.
Yes, and it's fake. There's like one woman that's like in charge of everything, and all the governments are working together, and she's like,
that's definitely a fantasy idea.
Yeah, I kind of said like I kind of told you, but I think she's kind of like a Q type character. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know how to explain it better than that though.
Yeah.
Like she's in charge of everything. You know what I mean? She's like putting all the pieces together. And then I was watching some reviews of the books on YouTube, people talking about it because I was like just fascinated by it, right?
Yeah.
And I was like trying to see what other people said. And a lot of the criticisms of the book were that they didn't think that the characters were believable. And I was like, they're not supposed to be like real characters. They're supposed to be fantastical. You know what I mean? But I think that the way that he sets up the first part of the book tricks you into thinking that it's going to be this technical book. So a lot of people can't get their minds out of that frame of reference.
Do you think that it's because it isn't gradual enough change, that because the switch flips so quickly that people are thrown by it? Or
I think, well, there's kind of two parts going on because there's a part where he's on the ship alone, and then there's another part that's
where he's on Earth.
Yeah, and the part on Earth is more of a slow burn because at the beginning he's basically only interacting with a couple different people, but then as the book progresses, then the governments are working together, and he takes like an American fighter plane to land on like a Chinese aircraft carrier, and then there's like all these people working together on this Chinese aircraft carrier, and then they end up going to like the Middle East somewhere to like, or China, I forget where, but like to send these rockets to space. And it's just like, so basically it builds up to being more and more characters, and as you get more and more characters in there, you don't have time to write everyone super well rounded and like dynamic and like that these are people. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of a little bit of a tough question to say where people get lost, because I didn't really get lost like that. Like I just understood what it was.
Yeah.
But I put Emma and Project Hail Mary together because I thought it was super interesting.
Because you read those pretty much back to back even.
Yeah, pretty close. But I just thought it was super interesting how you can read something wrong, right? And like that's what you said about some people will not like these books.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because you're like, oh, you can't have a plastic surgery Nazi hunter. That's too many things. Like that's like I can see somebody not getting it.
Yeah. Again, right? it is one of those things where it's so especially given I'm amazed I haven't talked about my book yet. Reason and Romance, available wherever books are sold. Because I've been working on that book and working on the next books, and the next book that's coming out, One Man's Treasure, is a different kind of book than Reason and Romance. It needs to have lots of different cues in the story as well as in the design and packaging that indicate this is what kind of book it is, so that the person that wants to read that kind of book will read that kind of book.
Yes.
Because if I hated romance novels and picked up a romance novel, then I'll probably hate the romance novel. I'll give it a bad review because it's not my bag.
Yeah.
as ideally you want to design and package and get everything so that the book is exactly what people are looking for when they're picking up the book. And that's the hard thing is it sounds like, especially with Project Hail Mary, a lot of people just don't get it. Admittedly, this is where like a pulp books like Under the Knife, that cover, I would be shocked if someone looked at that and thought, oh, I'm going to get like a serious melodrama.
Totally.
So my next book, this is one I very, very much was like on the edge of whether or not to recommend, because so it's called The Men We Need, God's Purpose for the Manly Man, The Avid Indoorsman, and Any Man Willing to Show Up by Brant Hansen.
The avid indoorsman?
Yes, The Avid Indoorsman. Okay. I typically don't recommend books that have strong religious connotations to them.
Yeah.
Just because, again, everyone, their own thing. But the thing I liked about this book is that basically his premise is 6 decisions that every man should make.
Yeah.
And I like the premise of it. I think that regardless of where someone fits.
Well, hold on. What's the 6 decisions? Like, what's the one of them?
One of them is like, I think it's the 6th one, is basically take ownership of your spiritual life, which honestly, I think regardless of where one is with that is accurate. Because even Ryan Holiday, who I think these days he's agnostic, would say you need to have some kind of spiritual component to your life.
Yeah, there's some metaphysical element to life for everyone, right?
Yeah. So honestly, I think that if someone is non-Christian, they could still get something out of it, regardless, just from the basic premise of the concept is men taking responsibility. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be the Hemingway hero to do that. And that's why he has the book described the way he does, The Avid Indoorsman, Any Man Willing to Show Up.
Do you remember before we were having a conversation, I was like telling you about how I kind of have different aspects of my life. I have like relationships, money, which is like business, right? What I'm doing for work. I have creativity, and then I have fitness.
Yeah.
And basically all the things that I do fit into that. Is that kind of the same thinking, that there's like 6 things like that, or like what is it? Like what are the other?
The first one is reject the real and reject the fake and embrace the real.
Okay, so it's more philosophical type questions to ask.
Some of it is philosophical. I'm trying to think what one of the other ones is. One of them is embrace real life. One is this choosing to be a protector. Okay. Like don't be the one that runs away. Be the one that actually helps.
Be the sheepdog. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, part of it is, I would describe it as a different version of, say, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules.
Right. More religion.
But what I like is the way he frames it is these are choices that you have to make. Because at the end of the day, you will choose whether you are going to embrace having a fantasy life, online relationships that are purely digital, or if you are going to do real things in the real world. Mm-hmm. Especially today's day and age, because video games can be fun, but if the only like achievements you make are your stats on a video game, what does that really mean at the end of the day? If that's all you are looking for, great. But if you think that life is more than that, you should be investing in more than that.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. No, it sounds good. I like stuff like that, like, life.
Mm-hmm.
See, and again, that's what I was talking about before, about if someone, like if I heard that from 2 other people or whatever, I wouldn't care if I'm not like super Christian. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I would read that. I don't care. Like whatever. So there's something in it for me.
Well, that's the thing that just impresses me, is I genuinely think that regardless of where one sits, it's a good book because it does force you to ask yourself those questions. And maybe you choose a different way, or you have different reasons for it. But at the end of the day, the premise is, are you going to be responsible for your own shit?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So what's your next one, Scott?
Okay. My next book is a trilogy. So I'm cheating again.
You know what? I remember one year I was like, are we going to do 10 books? You're like, oh, could we only do 6?
Yeah, I want to do like 4. So this book series is called A Remembrance of Earth's Past Trilogy by Cixin Liu. Okay. It's a Chinese guy. I think it's the greatest feat of imagination that I've from one person. Um, it's probably the greatest feat of imagination that I've ever listened to or heard ever, hands
Wow.
down. I feel pretty good saying that. It's 3 books.
You've even read my book, so what does that say?
Um, well, we'll get into this, but this. I'm just trying to think about the best way to describe this. There's basically 3 books.
Yeah.
One's called The Three Body Problem. The second one's called The Dark Forest. The third one's called Death's End. Okay.
Love the names, by the way.
Yeah, I was doing a live stream last year. I was doing painting, and one guy had basically said that he read this. I don't know. Somehow we started talking about stuff, and he said to read this book called The Three Body Problem. He had read it. He liked it, and I read this first one at the end of last year, like December, November, whatever that was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went on this year to read the other 2, and it's incredible. It's incredible. It's
What's the premise of the trilogy as a whole?
the first book is there's this guy. There's obviously a whole bunch of different characters because it's a trilogy, right? But there's the first book. It's this guy, and he's on Earth, and he starts getting like these messages basically flashed on his retina, on his eye, that only he can see. It's like a countdown, and he doesn't know what's going to happen at the end of this countdown, and it won't go away. He's taking pictures on like a film camera, and this countdown is showing up on the developed pictures, and it's like super weird. This goes on to this whole thing, and there ends up being this video game, and it's called The Three Body Problem. So he puts on this haptic suit, and then you can go into this video game. In this video game, there's not a lot going on in the world. It's kind of like an open desert, and it's really cold. There's basically like these they call them chaotic eras or stable eras. In a stable era, you know when the sun is coming up and when it's setting. And in a chaotic era, like the sun could just go down and then come up like 5 minutes later. So basically, in this video game, these creatures can dehydrate themselves to make it through the chaotic eras. And so it's like a science-based game where these you're trying to figure out the rules for how the sun works. Okay, you're trying to figure out the rules for how this, yeah, so that the civilization can keep on going.
Yeah,
okay?
Because life is based on the sun.
Yes.
Wow.
So they're trying to figure out. The rules for the sun. So basically, this guy's going back in this video game, and they're just getting decimated. So then the world will end, and it'll be like, oh, world 1,333 died, but it made it a total of like 1,200 years or whatever. Log back in to play again. So it's like this really weird thing. It's like super engaging. And then, yeah, long story long, but it turns out that the video game, the world that is on the video game is an actual world.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a computer simulation of an actual world. And there's 3 suns that are going around this world. And basically, at the end of the first book, these aliens are going to start coming to Earth because Earth is stable, right? And their world is super chaotic. And so, yeah, they send like a message to Earth, and the Earth is back, and they're 4 light years away, and the aliens can go 10% the speed of light, just about. And so it's going to take them 450 years to get to Earth. So at the end of the first book, the aliens are on their way. They've sent a couple of radio signals back and forth with Earth, and it's super crazy. This gets into like it gets a little super sciencey a couple of times, but basically like a proton is like what we consider to be like the smallest building block of life. Yeah, it's like one of them, right? And they figured out a way to unfold a proton and to etch a computer onto it, and they put it back together and they send it to Earth, and they basically froze our understanding of physics. So we're kind of stuck with like the technology that we have now, and they're on their way to take us over. And so the first one's on Earth. There's like some people that are like more environmentalists that are like fuck the earth, and they're trying to help the aliens, right? So
Because
there's
of
like,
course they will be benevolent overlords.
yes, well that's what they think. They have great technology and they can fix mankind's problems essentially, right? Um, so there's like, yeah, this organization called the ETO, and the first book is very much about like the humans versus the ETO, and you don't really see anything with the aliens or anything like that. What's going on? Um, the second book is probably my favorite, and it's much more into the future. And it's about the first one takes place in like from 1960 till now. The
Okay.
next book takes place, I think, over, I forget the time span. Basically, the aliens are on their way. So over the next like 450 years, it takes place. And it's just, it's crazy. Like I can't accurately describe without just keeping on talking about how much depth and richness there is to this. In the third book, it gets into being like multi-dimensional talk, and it all makes sense, and it goes way out into the future, like built like to basically the end of the universe. And it is so interesting. Like I don't even the first book I would say is not nothing is it's good, it's a good book. It's nothing crazy. The second book I started getting blown away, and by the third book, by the end of it, I was like, oh, this has so many layers to it. This has so many layers to it. It's like, it's unbelievable. There's like stories within stories within stories. There's bits from history that they've gone back in time and like done stuff with, and like it's crazy. I loved it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what was the series called again?
It's called The Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy.
Okay.
But it's the three body problem is the first book. But yeah, there's this one really cool thing where there's these guys called the wall breakers and the wall facers. Basically the aliens, because they sent that proton, they can know everything that's happening, but they can't know what's happening inside our minds. And so to come up with a plan to get rid of the aliens, there's these certain people that are they're called the wall facers, and you would basically be allowed to do whatever you want with whatever resources you wanted, because like the governments have kind of come together to stop these aliens. But you can't,
as governments do.
Yeah, but you can't tell anybody what your plan is, because then the aliens will know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's like these guys that are like working in secret by themselves to like try to make up a plan to like kill the aliens or deter them or whatever, right? But then the ETO, like the people that are working with the aliens, they make special guys called the wall breakers, whose only job it is to figure out what the plans are. And it's like super interesting. There's four wall facers, and they all have plans. And like the main story in the second book follows one of these wall facers, and then he ends up being the main character for like the rest of the series, because he like goes into hibernation a couple times to skip through parts, and so it like skips ahead, but you're skipping ahead with the same character, so it's kind of nice. It's not like it's not too. It just works, man. It just works, and it's like, yeah, it's wild. It's wild. There's like, it's obviously fantastical elements to it and stuff, but no, I definitely think, yeah, I was thinking about it afterwards. I was like, because by the end, it's like there's like dimensions and stuff, and it's just like I'm like, I don't even understand how this is. I don't understand how one man could have thought all this. Like, how did you plot this out? Did you just start writing? Like, get yourself into some bad corners? Like, I want to know about this guy. I want to know how he did this. Like,
have you tried looking up anything about the author?
No, he's Chinese. So I don't know
how much he can actually talk.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's it's translated by another guy with the same last name. I don't know if that means anything, because I think LIU is a pretty common Chinese name. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I don't know, if that guy speaks English, but yeah, it blew me away in like the best ways possible. I think the second book is I re-listened to the first book this past week just so I could get into the second book again. Um, it was, yeah, just totally mind blowing. I honestly, I can't even, begin to comprehend how you write something like that. Like even something complicated like Lord of the Rings or like Harry Potter or something, because those are
Yeah,
longer stories,
series.
Yeah, those at least make sense to me. It's like this is going to go to this to this to this, but like this one is
Very
just like,
linear.
oh man, this one's got and then so book is linear too, but it's just got like it's just huge, dude. It's just huge, and like when you're getting into that first book, you don't realize how far it's going to go. Basically,
Excellent.
yeah, that's what I got.
Uh, my last book is The Disorderly Knights by Dorothy Dunnett. This is the fourth book in the legendary Lymond Chronicles. Basic premise is, so this is the fourth book in a series. The fascinating thing is I got to book 2 in the series, was like, wow, this one's kind of lame. But then I kept listening, and no, this one's book 3. This one's book 3. So this is the one that like I got to after. Each one of the books is kind of named after a chess thing. So like the first book was The Game of Kings, the second book was Queen's Play, third book is The Disorderly Knights. And I was like, no, I don't want to read that one, because instead of like the first book is all set in Scotland. And that's cool,
Yeah.
because it's set in Scotland during the time where Henry the Eighth, I think, is king.
Yeah.
Or roughly in that time period. So basically, Scotland is without a king. There's a queen regent, and England is trying to woo the Scottish nobles to just eventually put their dominance over Scotland. But then you have the Scottish patriots that they're trying to keep Scotland. We see how well that worked for them. But then in this book, The Disorderly Knights, Lymond is an adventurer, a very swashbuckling character. In the first book, he's kind of like this Robin Hood type or Rob Roy, where he's stealing stuff and he's got his band of merry men. But we find out he's actually been working to try to stop the English and save the Scots. And of course, by the end of that book, he's pardoned. He's the younger brother, so he gets to kind of do whatever he wants. By this book, they're like, Lymond is too good to not actually have a life purpose. Let's send him to Malta to work with the Knights Hospitallers of St. John. There, he meets Gabriel, a tall, manly knight who speaks with the voice of an angel. His actual name is Graham Mallet. He's Scottish. The Knights Hospitallers was one of those groups, kind of like the Knights Templar back in that day. It was the last of that type of organization. Well, he gets lots of stuff happens, bad things happen, and now the Knights Hospitallers kind of disbands. They lose Malta, and a lot of people have to go to Scotland. Lymond decides to start his own mercenary company, and Graham Mallet decides to come and help out. He's a good guy. He's a good Christian man, and he wants the best. He wants to change Lymond, reform Lymond. Lymond is a lascivious individual who just really wants to do whatever he wants, whatever he wants. By about halfway through the book, 3/4 of the way through the book, Lymond's like, we need to get rid of Graham Mallet. And they're like, but he's such a good guy. He's like, but think about it. Here's all the things, like all these bad things that have been happening that people keep blaming me for. Let's actually look at all of these things in detail. And so then it shifts back through, and you realize Graham Mallet has been trying to sabotage Lymond from the beginning, take the mercenary company they've been building, and take over Scotland for himself.
Interesting.
And it's fantastic. It is terribly well written. Lymond is the most daring do swashbuckling type character. He's everything that Robin Hood is if you put in a lot more intellect. Like he randomly speaks in poetry, different languages. He's a Renaissance man who's also really great with the sword and is good with the ladies.
I think Robin Hood is one of my favorite characters of all time. And I haven't really read any Robin Hood, but just like the concept of him.
So the first book then, Game of Kings, I actually do think you would enjoy.
Okay.
Because he's basically Robin Hood, but even sexier.
Nice.
Yeah. So Also, I can't remember the name of the audiobook narrator, which I feel really bad at right now, but the guy that reads it, it's like David something. He has this beautiful Scottish voice. And so when he reads all the words in the story, you really feel like you're there in Scotland. Each individual character has a different voice, and it's terribly good. It's so good. Down to the fact even that in this book, Graham Mellott has a younger sister that they're like trying to get to marry Lyman, but she's so pure, so incorruptible. He is all but corruption. And then you find out that really she is a hooer who has just
Been doing
very bad person, and her brother wanted to use her to make Lyman's reputation be dragged into the mud by corrupting this innocent woman. It's a really good book.
Yeah, it's cool. That's awesome.
So those are our books. So mine, in no particular order, are Wolf, The Lives of Jack London by James L. Haley, Discipline is Destiny, The Power of Self-Control by Ryan Holiday, Soho Sins by Richard Vine, The Men We Need by Brant Hansen, Under the Knife by Matt Pagaris and John Borges, and The Disorderly Nights by Dorothy Dunnett. What were yours, Scott?
$1 Billion Painter, Lord of the Rings trilogy, What to Say When Talking to Yourself, A Billion Years. I did Emma / Project Hail Mary, and then A Remembrance of the Earth's Past trilogy.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are our recommendations for the year 2022. Scott, what is going on in your world? What can we look for from the Wild Man in 2023?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm going to paint a lot. I've got a really good job that lets me paint and work. I'm going to make a bunch of money and save it up. And I'm going to try to get as many paintings done as I can. Oh, actually, you know what? I think I'm going to try doing a live stream show.
Awesome.
That's my newest thing. I'm basically we're recording this at the end of November because next week I'm going to Thailand for 2 months, essentially. So I'm trying to not have too many, I'm basically trying to close a bunch of loops and then go on my vacation and come back fresh. So I don't want to come back with what I need to do because I just want to come back fresh. You know what I mean? I just want to take time. I just want to not have anything here that I'm going to be coming back to the same bullshit. I just want to let whatever happens there happen there and figure out what's going on. But I'm thinking that I want to live stream a lot more of my paintings. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about for the past week. But no, I've been painting, and I was trying to think about this the other day. I think that at the beginning of the year, I thought I would get a lot more paintings done, but I was basically hoping to get to a certain spot technically, skill wise. And I thought I would get more paintings done. And I don't know if I thought that I would be basically I got way less done than I thought. But I think I was a lot more deliberate in my practice, and my skills are either at the level that I wanted them to be at or maybe a little bit above. I made this last painting that I made, and it's technically one of the best paintings I've ever made. So I'm just super stoked on it, and I'm super stoked to see what happens. But no, I got to paint next year somehow. So that's what I'm thinking. That's my main focus. I got to paint. I got to paint. I'm going to make my painting videos, and that's it, man. Just got to keep the hammer down. What about you?
Excellent. One Man's Treasure will be coming out, I'm thinking, in April. That's the project, and working on the next book.
Nice. Do you have any inklings for what it's going to be yet?
The next book, it's probably going to be the sequel to Reason and Romance.
Nice.
Just because I've already got the premise, I've already started on it, and it'll be a good story. Can't wait to see what happens.
Cool, man. Always fun talking.
Thanks for coming, Scott. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Scott Hebert Art. You search that on YouTube. That's me. That's pretty much going to be my main place now.
All right. Find that wherever the YouTubes are watched. Scott Hebert, thank you for joining us on Suit Up the Podcast.
Thanks for having me.